Important moment for the MTA in New York City as we resume 24/7 subway service, and the governor continues to lift COVID restrictions on bars, restaurants, and other businesses this week. At the MTA, we've got a singular focus right now, which is bringing people back to mass transit, because New York City's resurgence and recovery is ultimately dependent on that. We were pleased to hear the mayor announce earlier today an additional 250 NYPD officers in the transit system to help aid in these efforts. That's incredibly important step in the right direction. And we believe it will help address the serious issue of crime and harassment in the subways. I thank Mayor de Blasio and Commissioner Shea for their partnership here. We still have a long way to go, and we think these officers will be needed, but we thank the city for recognizing the issue, the need for additional police resources, and answering the call. And most importantly, we know that's the case because we hear it from our customers. We need to see officers on trains and platforms, both NYPD and MTA police officers. There has to be a visible presence in the system, because that is going to make the difference for our customers and heroic employees. I want to make it clear that we've been actively hiring officers at the MTA Police Department. After action by Congress to stabilize our finances earlier this year, we're able to remove our hiring freeze across the agency. We took it off the MTA Police Department first and move forward. And by the summer, we will have hired an additional 400 of the 500 officers we had planned. We will continue to move expeditiously towards the 500 target. But now we need a commitment from City Hall that these patrols will remain dedicated to the system, to the transit system, as we recover. That is what we need to reopen strong and build back better, and it's what our valued customers and employees need too. They've made it clear that safety, crime, and harassment is their number one concern, and we hear it loud and clear. The next few weeks are crucial to the city's long-term recovery from this terrible pandemic. We want to build on the momentum we're seeing now in ridership. Just this past Friday, we hit another pandemic high on the subways, Long Island Railroad and Metro North. The subways that day alone served more than 2.26 million people, and that was before we restored 24/7 service. With that and the beautiful weather this week, I'm sure that number will grow even higher. As a lifelong New Yorker, I'm bullish on New York. I have no doubt that our post-pandemic recovery will be robust and that we will come back better than ever, especially if we continue to work closely with the city and the NYPD. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Sarah Feinberg.
Okay, thanks, Pat. Good afternoon. I want to acknowledge what a long way we've come over the last several weeks. A few weeks ago, we kept hearing from the city that crime in the system is at an all-time low. Then that there was no problem, the MTA was just fear-mongering. Then it shifted to, I'm not denying subway crime is a challenge, it's just not our only challenge. Then, quote, the tide needs to turn and the NYPD will do it. Then we are going to keep putting massive resources into this fight to keep our subways safe. And finally today, acknowledging the problem, acknowledging that in order to bring the city back and bring the economy back, transit has to come back. And then in order for that to happen, real and significant steps have to be taken in order to bring safety, security, and confidence back. And finally, the mayor said today, importantly, that he would do whatever it takes. Doing whatever it takes, as long as that remains the case, is great news for our riders, for our workforce, and for New York. First, the city announced that they would be adding 644 additional officers. Then they announced an additional 80. Then they announced another additional 80. And now today they've announced an additional 250. And by our count, that puts us at over 1,000 officers that have been added to the system in the last several weeks. And so I think the mayor hit the nail on the head today when he said this is what's needed to bring the city back and to bring the economy back. And so we're going to hold him to it. We want a commitment that these officers will remain in the system as the city continues its recovery and as we continue to welcome riders back. We need the NYPD Transit Bureau to start working with us on transparency and deployment information just as we work with them. And we need significant mental health resources in the system, including allowing the 311 system to work in the subway system, which we know the city is working on and we are told is on time, which is great news. And finally, we need the mayor to remain committed to what he said today, which is to do whatever it takes to bring the transit system back and to bring the city and the economy back. We will be here to partner with him all along, as we have been, and we look forward to doing so. Thank you. Take questions?
Pat, those 400 cops out of the 500 that you guys have hired, does that mean that the MTA police force is now 400 people larger, or officers larger than it was in December 2019? And are all those 400 cops going to be in the subways?
So Clayton, no, not all 400 cops will be, police officers will be in the system. We've reported that we've dedicated 100 MTA police officers to the subway system, and that's going to continue for the indefinitely. Please.
Suggested that you have. I'm sorry. Hey, I'm sure you heard the mayor suggested that there are vacancies for police hires. How many vacancies do there need to be filled, and what's your response to the mayor saying that a lot of those resources should come to the New York City subway system or to New York City Transit?
Well, look, the MTA. Let's base principles. The NYPD has primary responsibility for policing the subways. That's a result of an agreement that goes back to 1995 when the transit police and the NYPD were combined. Despite that, we have put, Sarah Feinberg and her team have put an additional, the MTA police has put an additional 100 police officers in the subways. We've added 100 security people in addition to 100 that were already there. And we are focused, and we're going to do whatever we can to assist the NYPD, but it's primarily the NYPD's responsibility. Look, any organization, whether it's a police department or a finance department, is going to have vacancies as a result of attrition, but we have hired or are hiring an additional 400, and we will hire the additional 100 later in the year as police classes are available. NJ.
The budget proposal for those 500 officers back in 2019 said that they were mainly for support for fare evasion and homelessness outreach. Is that still true, or what are they going to be doing differently?
No. Do you want to speak to it?
Sure, I'm happy to. I don't particularly remember the language that you're referring to, but MTA police, the railroads, obviously, Grand Central, and we've injected more MTA police into the subway system than have ever been injected in before. So it used to be MTA police used to predominantly be railroads, right of way. Now we've pushed many into the subway system. So generally, at least about a third of our officers, uniformed officers on any given shift, are actually in the subway system. In terms of fare evasion and homelessness, certainly we have MTA police that are at end-of-line stations, partnering with the Department of Homeless Services, with the city, partnering with other folks from the city, including the BRC, and some NYPD officers to offer social services to those who are experiencing homelessness. That's been the case for years. In terms of fare evasion, we've asked our officers for some time that if you're near the fare raise and you see someone who's evading the fare, please redirect them out. But our first step is not to write a summons, and it hasn't been for some time. I don't know if that answers your question.
Is there a threshold for which we won't need any more police in the subway system? Is there a crime threshold where you will be comfortable with saying the subway system is safe enough, or is the...
I'm not sure I follow the threshold question. I mean, we have spoken many times, and many other transit systems have said the same thing in terms of there being a tipping point in terms of ridership, that we know the system was very different, felt very different, and was very different in terms of crime when we were at 5.5, 6 million riders per day. Philadelphia said similar things. Atlanta said similar things. And so we know that there is safety in numbers. And when you hit that tipping point of ridership, things do feel better and things tend to be much better. Now, what we're all grappling with is what do you do between now and that tipping point? How do you make sure that you're bringing riders back, that you're bringing people who are sitting on the sidelines, haven't come back to the system yet? How do you bring those people back to the system? Bring them back with giving them confidence on being safe from COVID exposure and confidence on crime and harassment. That's what our customer survey seems to suggest.
Last week you suggested you passed out on
the number of cops that were then currently in the system. Do you trust the numbers now?
Last week I said what? I'm sorry.
Last week you cast doubt about the
cast
numbers of officers that were still in the transit system based on something the mayor had said. Do you trust the 250 number now?
Look, I take the mayor at his word. I mean, he said that 644 officers surged into the system following the horrific stabbings in February. We took him at his word. He then later seemed to suggest that they had been taken out, and the NYPD then said that he had misspoken and that they stayed in. So there was a lot of back and forth there. I take him at his word if he says the 644 is still in the system. I take him at his word on the 80. I take him at his word on the other 80. I take him at his word on the 250. So look, if he says those folks are going into the system, I think that's good news, and I'll trust him.
Yep. Great, thank you. You guys have been saying for a while that you've wanted 500 additional officers. You're getting 250. So is the glass half full or half empty?
Well, I mean, gosh, we started saying 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, that we wanted 500 additional police officers. Our board gave us the ability to go hire those 500 additional police officers from the MTA. Then many months ago, we started saying we needed a greater presence in the subway system from the NYPD. You know, that has come in fits and starts. I think at one point we said 1,000. At one point we said 1,500. At one point I said, when you're pulling into a station, I want people to feel a presence. I want people to know that if they don't see a police officer on that platform, they're likely to see one at the next station, or they're likely to see one walking onto their train. I want people to feel like there is a presence that will deter any issues that could come up. At this point, we've gone so far back and forth on numbers. I think what we would say is, you know, if 1,000 new officers are really in the system, that is great news. Let's make sure they stay in the system while New York continues its recovery, and let's see what the impact is. I mean, the mayor said he'll do whatever it takes. I'll take that to the bank. That is really good news.
And if I could just follow up, Sarah, real quick. What was your reaction and Pat's reaction to the Channel 7 report on Friday?
Look, I thought it was great reporting. So for those of you who may have missed it, it was a report about spending many hours in the subway system. Actually, you know, how many police officers might one see if you're traveling 4 boroughs, several hours, many stations, many trains. Look, I think it echoes a bit what some riders are feeling, which is they see, you know, the city saying that there are many officers in the system, and they believe the city, and they believe that, and they want that to be true, and they believe that to be true. But when you're in the system, it sometimes doesn't feel that way. And, you know, for me, I'm in the system at least 5 days a week, usually 7 days a week. I try to be as many places as I can be. Sometimes I feel like I see a presence, sometimes I don't. You and I had a conversation about how pleased I was to see the TOMS exhibit. I've never seen a TOMS myself. I would love to on a train, but I think it reflected a lot of what riders are feeling, which is that, you know, people are talking a lot about numbers, but they're not feeling the presence.
And Jay, I would add important and surely award-winning coverage.
Thank you, Jim.
So glad I asked the question.
What do you think was the tipping point to get to 250? You went through the back and forth that you've had with the city over the last several weeks and months. What do you think finally kind of pushed the mayor to give you this jump in officers, this spike?
First, we're thankful for the mayor's decision. I think it was the righteousness of our cause. I think we were fighting, both of us, for our customers and employees, and our cause was right and righteous. I think that's the answer. And we're thankful for the mayor's action.
In November 2019, right as you guys were gearing up to hire the 500 new officers, the NYPD told the MTA that it would break from precedent and not train the new MTA cops at the Flushing Police Academy, where the MTA cops have been trained since the 90s. Where have the cops been, these 400 new cops, where have they been trained since then? And de Blasio today said, okay, we'll train your cops. Do you expect him to, will you take him up on that? Will the MTA new hires soon move over to the...
Yeah, so two things. Academy? One is it's College Point, Queens. I'm from Queens, and that's important. These officers will be trained by the NYPD.
Okay, what about the other one? What about the previous 400 that you've hired since November 2019? Where were they trained?
Many, if not most of them, were trained by the NYPD.
They were trained by the previously, or after they got hired by the MTA? Because I know a lot of previous officers at the MTA had a previous life at the NYPD.
Some officers came from the NYPD or other police departments, so they, by definition, were trained elsewhere. But going forward, they're going to be trained by the NYPD in College Point.
Our last question. Is the 250 additional officers, that's tours, not hiring additional 250 officers. Is that your understanding? And if so, is that okay with you?
As I understand it, it's 250 police officers.
They're hiring new 250, or they're diverting?
Some of it may be overtime. They may be shifting. As Sarah says, we're going to have to be careful to monitor it. We do take the mayor at his word, but we're going to have to monitor both the number and the deployment, which is equally important.
Sorry. The most recent fare evasion arrest and summonses data from the first quarter of 2021, 92% of those arrested for fare evasion were black or Hispanic. 75% were black or Hispanic who were summoned. You guys are calling for more NYPD in the subway stations, yet these racial disparities keep persisting. What is the MTA doing to address those racial disparities with?
Well, look,
more cops
as
in the
Sarah
subway?
said, we're not focused primarily on fare evasion now. What we're doing is redirecting to the turnstile when a police officer says that. But what we want to see is the NYPD and the MTA police when they're in the subways, on subway cars and subway platforms. A visible presence of a uniformed police officer will, in lots of cases, deter crime. Many of the crimes that have occurred over the past weeks have been crimes of opportunity, and increased ridership together with a visible police presence will help control and deter crime. Thanks, everybody.